I told him I thought his boss was way more attractive as a joke, but he took it to heart and then...
I thought I was being playful when I told him his boss was very attractive, but I didn't realize it was the first crack in the foundation of everything we built and the door I opened to ruin my marriage. So, Reddit community, please, I need you all to hear me out and give me your advice on what I should do next, because I really need my marriage to work again. Please, no biased advice or hate comments. We are all humans and we are not perfect. I'm losing my mind each passing day and I'm struggling so hard to accept the reality of my situation, but I can't. I swear in my life I never intended for anything to go wrong until I realized that I used my own hand to ruin the perfect life I had. Okay, let me tell you everything that happened. My name is Anna and my husband's name is Ken. We dated for 4 years before we got married 5 years ago. Yes, I had 4 good years to choose between him and another guy or to get distracted, but I wanted him and only him. When we relocated to our new house a year after our wedding, I stopped working as I was still recovering from my miscarriage. My last work as a banker was tedious. Ken and I had decided that I would quit working for some time, but maybe in the future if I ever wanted to start again, he would be okay with it. I became comfortable at staying at home, practicing different food recipes. Ken was totally fine with it. In fact, aside from working in the office, he created a home office and he tried his best to leave work early and complete any unfinished task from his home office just to be around me. Ken was very kind, and he felt guilty that he let me work when I was pregnant, and that led to the miscarriage. But I told him not to put the blame on himself, and gradually, we were healing from it. During this period, Ken would go the extra mile just to make me happy, and even before this, he has always been a romantic and caring partner. He gave me everything I wanted and told me my happiness was his happiness. He even reduced and declined extra shifts just to be with me. That was how lovely he was. My friends envied our marriage so much, and I loved how they do wish their relationship and marriage could be like ours. Then we had our boys, Jamie and Ethan. Ken, as expected, became a very kind father many children dreamt of having. He built pillow forts, coached soccer games, and read bedtime stories in the most animated voices, something I was lazy to do most times. When he learned about the promotion opportunity, he motivated him to start putting in extra effort to achieve it. It was an opportunity of a lifetime, what we ever wanted, and what would be enough to cater for our growing family. I was very happy for him and proud of him. I had another thing to boast about while chit-chatting with my friends. I didn't let my friends know exactly what's going on in my marriage, but some good news is worth bragging about. Ken had worked so hard for years, and he deserved every bit of recognition. At first, the long hours of work that came after he became aware of the promotion didn't bother me. I understood the stakes, the pressure he must have felt to succeed. It was just a busy season, he'd assured me every time he kissed my forehead before disappearing into his home office, and I believed him. And then he finally got the promotion. Aside from getting promoted, he became Michael's favorite. Michael is his boss. In the office, they do keep it professional, and outside the office walls, these two were good friends. And that didn't affect their working relationship. I was aware of their friendship, but I had never seen Michael before. Again, another promotion came up. Of course, I didn't want him to be in one position forever. So I was ready for this one. And I was looking at the bright side of it because when he finally gets the promotion, he will do less work, have more time for himself and his family, while getting a bigger pay. So I fully supported this particular one. But this period was supposed to get better. This one didn't. Weeks turned into months, and Ken became a ghost in our home. The man who once played hide-and-seek with the boys until they got exhausted and fell asleep was now too tired to even sit through dinner. Weekends were no longer fun, they became extensions of his work week, all in the name of leading a major project. I tried to keep the boys occupied, telling myself it was just a phase. But deep down, I missed him. We all did. It wasn't just his absence that hurt, it was the growing sense that he was slipping away from us and we were losing him day by day. I started noticing things like the way he avoided eye contact when I asked about his day, the late-night phone calls he took in hushed voices, and the way he'd stiffen whenever I entered his home office unexpectedly. My mind began to wander into dangerous territory. Was it just work? Or was there something more? At that point, who wouldn't have suspected that something was off? I couldn't keep it to myself anymore, so I decided to confide in my friend Laura. She's been my rock for years, the kind of person who tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. When I poured out my concerns, she listened carefully. She told me she was not suspecting him of being up to anything, and that I needed to trust my instincts. If something feels off and it keeps eating me up, then I should figure it out myself. Maybe follow him one day when he goes out and see for myself. The idea made me uneasy, but Laura had a point. There had been a time years ago when I'd felt a similar distance between us. Back then, it had been work, just as he claimed. He was under so much pressure, and I let my insecurities get the better of me. When the truth came out, I felt terrible for doubting him. But this time, something felt different. This time, I couldn't shake off that nagging suspicion that there was a skeleton in the cupboard. Then there was Michael. He first came into the picture shortly after Ken's first promotion, during one of the many company events I attended to support my husband. He was charismatic, a man who could command the room with his presence alone. And I just admired the aura. Honestly, there was nothing more to it. When he approached me, his charm was disarming. He complimented my dress and joked about how Ken must be very busy that night to notice how beautiful I looked. I had laughed, flattered by his words, and even mentioned it to Ken later that night. To my surprise, Ken didn't find it funny. He told me Michael was actually like that to everyone, and I shouldn't read too much into it. His tone was cold, and I myself was annoyed because I didn't read any meaning to it. I was only hoping he would be a little sorry for inviting me to his company's event without being beside me. I understood he had some background work to do as the event was going on, but at least I needed my partner. Instead of being sorry for that, he was mad over a mere compliment. It led to a misunderstanding, one that lasted for days before we eventually sorted it out. I assured Ken that I only had eyes for him, and he promised to make more time for our family. For a while it felt like we were back on track. But promises are hard to keep when work takes over your life. One evening, after Ken left the house for yet another late-night work, I felt the same loneliness creep back in. Suddenly, Laura's advice echoed in my mind. That night, I decided to see for myself what was keeping Ken away. I followed him carefully from a distance, only to see myself in front of his office. He was exactly where he said he was heading to. I guessed he left some documents he badly needed to carry out. A particular task that night. Relief flooded through me, but so did a deep sense of guilt. He was working hard for us, for our family. Why wasn't that enough for me? Still, that loneliness remained. And then came the day when Michael's charm found its way back into my life in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was at a company charity gala, one Daniel had insisted I attend, despite knowing he'd be tied up with work all evening. I told him I wanted to spend time with the boys, but he was persistent, so I finally agreed. As the event wound down, Michael offered to give me a ride home. He was heading towards my direction for another event, and Ken had something to tie up before leaving. I hesitated, but the boys needed me, and Ken told me I could go. Remembering the misunderstanding I had with Ken in the past because of Michael, I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't want to make a scene. Reluctantly, I agreed. The ride started innocently enough as silence ruled. The silence in the car became so awkward and was eating me up, so I decided to start a conversation. We talked about the event, how he became close with Ken and Ken's dedication to work. Then his tone shifted. He told me Ken was lucky to have someone as understanding as me, and that it's not easy being married to a man who's always working while I take care of 2 kids at home all by myself. His words struck a nerve. For months, I had been burying my loneliness trying to justify Ken's absence. But there Michael was, acknowledging it, validating the feelings I had tried so hard to suppress. He added that he knew how lonely I felt most of the time and that I deserved to be seen and appreciated. Those words really hit me hard. For a moment, I let his words wash over me. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him, to let his words and charm fill the void Ken left. But Michael was not in any position to get personal with me, so I thought of my husband and all the sacrifices he was making just so that we could be fine, and I pulled back, both physically and emotionally. I didn't know why Michael said that, be it pure concerns or whatever, I didn't care. The rest of the ride was silent. When we reached my house, I stepped out of the car without a word or a backward glance. That was kind of childish, I admit. He didn't do anything wrong, although he felt otherwise. Maybe he shouldn't have commented on my marriage. He had no right. So that night, as I was about to go to bed, I felt the urge to make things work between Ken and I. I couldn't let his distance build a world between us. We needed to find our way back to each other, at least for the sake of our children. I didn't want to bother him that night, as it has been a long day already. So the following evening, I made the first move. I walked into his home office, where he was buried in his work, and placed my hand on his shoulder. He looked up, surprised. I asked him if we could talk. He agreed and set his work aside. I poured out how I felt about the long hours, and the constant absence was suffocating. And not just me, but the children as well. They missed the father they had, and he couldn't even notice that I was drowning. He actually answered me in a calm tone, explaining that he was working hard for us, for our future, for the kids' future. I could feel the frustration in his voice, as though my pain was an inconvenience he had no time to address. He told me that the promotion he was chasing was the key to everything: a better life, security, the fulfillment of dreams we had once shared. I totally understood him, but he didn't understand me. To me, his answer made it clear that he saw my struggles as a failure to appreciate his efforts, not as a cry for connection. That's how I saw it. I felt a wall go up between us that night, one neither of us seemed willing to break. In the weeks that followed, our home became a cold and quiet place. I threw myself into the routine of managing the boys, the house, and everything else that came with being a mother and wife. Ken, meanwhile, seemed more distant than ever. He worked late at night, left before dawn, and all his attention was consumed by endless meetings and deadlines. One evening, as I stood folding laundry in our bedroom, my thoughts drifted back to that gala event and Michael's words to me, but I quickly dismissed the thought. It wasn't long after that Ken had to leave town to visit his mother. The woman was very sick. Not that I didn't care about the mom, but I nodded, pretending to understand, but inside I felt my resentment grow. I wasn't trying to be self-centered, but the minute he heard his mother was sick, he had to be there for her. What of the promotion he wanted so badly? Won't it affect his work? And what about me? He said he was so occupied and didn't have time for his own family. I get that his mother was badly sick, and she had no family aside from him, but still, it didn't stop me from feeling the way I felt. During his absence, I found myself thinking about Michael and the way his words had felt like a balm on my weary soul. I told myself it was innocent, just a distraction from the monotony of my days. Then, one afternoon, as I struggled with Jamie's tantrum and Ethan's school homework, I received a message from Ken saying he will be extending his visit. I became very angry and exhaustion overwhelmed me, but I controlled myself in front of the kids. I didn't know how much more I could handle alone. Later that day, Michael came around to drop some files for Ken. Ken had already told him to bring the files before extending his visit. He greeted me shortly, then he asked about the boys and about me. His concerns were pure, and I felt like crying out in front of him, but I told myself no. I told myself I didn't need anyone else, that I could manage. But the next week, when Jamie fell ill and I couldn't get Ethan to go play games with his friends, I found myself reaching out to Michael. He told me not to panic, and he exhibited the confidence of someone who had been through it all before. He helped with Ethan while I stayed with Jamie, and later that evening, when the house was finally quiet and the boys were asleep, he stayed for a cup of tea, and I couldn't keep things to myself anymore. Although I hid exactly what I was going through, we talked about parenting, the challenges of marriage, the loneliness that sometimes came with it. He told me about his own struggles of being in the city, while his wife and his daughter were far from him, but he visited them from time to time, and that was all we discussed about that night before he left, nothing more. Ken's mother's situation was getting worse, and I couldn't visit because the boys had to be in school, and I had to be there to take care of them. Michael had told Ken to take all the time he wanted. Then it happened slowly. almost imperceptibly. Michael and I started spending more time together. Michael would drop by to check on the boys and me, while Ken could stay a day or two without calling home, and I didn't care to call him. Michael became a presence in my life, a source of comfort and support. And somewhere along the way, the line between friendship and something more began to blur. But I kept telling myself that nothing will happen. Michael gave me the support I badly needed, and I shouldn't chase him away, but rather I should kill the growing feelings that had started to creep in. The first time Michael kissed me, I was overwhelmed with guilt. I told myself it was a mistake and that it wouldn't happen again. But the truth was, I didn't want it to stop. After all, it was just kisses and resting on his shoulders, and it won't go far. But then, it went far. We did it. We had a crazy intimate moment. Something we shouldn't have done, but it happened. And for the first time in years, I felt seen, valued, desired. A few days later, Ken returned home, but remained oblivious. He said he had to meet up with everything, the work he left behind, and just like that, he became too consumed by work to notice the change in me and the way I had begun to withdraw from him. I told myself it was his fault and that his neglect had driven me to Michael's side. Then one day Ken opened up to me about everything that happened with his mother. The woman was fine, but he was mad at me for not checking up on him when he was unable to call home. He told me that he was almost wrapping up with everything concerning work and he will be that husband and father again. I didn't feel even the tiniest bit of guilt. I was tired of him always having justification for all his actions, but I decided to end whatever was going on between me and Michael for the sake of my children. I told Michael that I didn't want to have any romantic relationship with him and we should forget about whatever happened between us. But he will still be my confidant. I loved the void he filled. I didn't want him gone, but at the same time I didn't want it to go far. He totally understood and said that he even felt guilty whenever he saw Ken. So with that, we decided to bury everything in the past. But like they say, nothing stays hidden forever. One evening, Ken returned home earlier than expected. I was upstairs sorting through the boys' stuff when I heard him scream my name in a way I hadn't heard before. I came downstairs and he was looking so excited as he told me that he got the promotion and that everything will return back to normal. He apologized for working so hard and not having time for our family, and now that he's on a higher level, he won't have to do much workload again and everything will be perfectly fine. He was happy and he hugged me tightly, and I feigned happiness because I felt more guilty than happy for ever blaming him when he was doing everything he could to make sure we had what we were about to enjoy. That night, we decided to have a special dinner without the boys to celebrate his promotion. Then, as we were eating, out of nowhere, he dropped the news that his boss was leaving town, and I said I was going to miss him, and that's when he looked at me confused. He just said, "Really?" and then proceeded to ask me why I would say that. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Well, honestly, he's more attractive than you," and I immediately regretted it. I don't know why I said that. Maybe because I was not happy hearing that Michael, the man I wanted to never leave my side, was leaving town and was going to stay with my husband who never cared or noticed anything about me anymore. But until I said it, I didn't know. But I said it as a joke. I knew that because no matter how I felt, I still wanted to stay married to Ken. But I could see my husband's face change. He didn't laugh. Instead, he just went quiet for a moment, and instantly my phone buzzed next to him. He picked it up without hesitation. His face went from bitter to sour as he looked at the screen, and then he turned the screen towards me and asked me to explain what the text meant. It was a message from Michael. He looked at me in disbelief, and his eyes were filled with anger. I was very scared from the look on my husband's eyes, and his hand's grip on the phone was so strong and capable enough to destroy my phone. The thing is, as my husband mentioned, Michael was leaving the city to stay with his family. He resigned because he was done setting up his personal business ventures. The message on the phone was a farewell text, telling me he enjoyed all the time we spent together. I thought maybe I would have come up with a perfect lie to match the text. That's what I wanted to do. But Ken was already demanding for the truth with so much intensity. I couldn't lie. I wept as I told him everything that happened between me and Michael. I tried to explain, to tell him about the loneliness, the pain, the way I had felt invisible for so long. But he won't hear me out. Me and Michael didn't even do anything deep. It was an accident. And whatever happened was just once and we stopped. Because I loved Ken. No matter how distant he was, I loved our marriage and I loved our kids and I didn't want anything to go wrong. But Ken didn't listen. Yes, I was consumed with guilt and regret. I begged him to hear me out, to let me explain. I told him I never meant for things to go that far and that I have been very understanding with him, and at least he should try to understand me as well. But he didn't. He said he couldn't trust me anymore and that the damage was done and that I had to leave. He gave me a few days to pack my things and figure out where I'd go, and he left the house for a few days because he couldn't stand me. The thought of leaving my boys and disrupting their lives was unbearable. I pleaded with Ken and told him we could fix things, anything to salvage what was left for the sake of our family. But he didn't want to fix anything. He told me that there was no going back from what I did, and that for me to have a pleasurable moment with Michael and still have the guts to say he was more attractive means I wanted out of our marriage, and I stopped loving him, and that hurts him badly. He said I had not betrayed only him but the boys when all what he ever did was for the family, but I didn't appreciate it. He reminded me I had a few days to leave the house before he returned and that I shouldn't worry about the kids. He will take care of them. Thankfully, he had enough time. I was desperate. I had nowhere to go to. I couldn't go to Michael. He had left already, and I couldn't just let go of my children. They made me smile. They were the reasons for my daily happiness, and I couldn't just see myself living without them. I needed a solution to my problem. So I ran to Laura again. She listened as I poured out my fears, my confusion, and my shame. She told me with the same blunt honesty as before that Ken might never forgive me. Even if he did, she said, he would likely bury himself in his work again, leaving me to deal with the same void that had pushed me toward Michael in the first place. Laura came up with something drastic, which was selling the house, taking the boys, and leaving before Ken could act further. She told me I had suffered to take care of my kids and no woman would be able to do that for me, and I needed to protect the kids from the fallout, to create a fresh start where we wouldn't be haunted by the shadow of my mistakes. At that time, I was too confused and overwhelmed to know if it was the right decision. I just needed something that would keep Ken close to me. Perhaps make him reconsider his decision. But the idea of taking the boys away from their father felt like another betrayal. Left alone with my thoughts and my guilt, I began to see the depth of the damage I had caused. Laura's words echoed in my mind, but I didn't know what to do. I wanted my boys. I wanted to keep their lives as normal as possible, but Ken's anger was unrelenting. Ken was smarter than I had given him credit for. He found out about my plans before I could execute them. Whether it was through intuition or his meticulous nature, I don't know, but he uncovered my attempts to prepare for a life elsewhere with the boys. I'll never forget the look on his face when he confronted me. It wasn't just anger, it was real pain, deep and raw. He told me I had no right to take the boys away, and that they needed stability, not the chaos I was creating. He told me I had destroyed the trust in our family, and now I was trying to run from the consequences. Then, with a voice colder than I thought possible, he told me to leave. He would handle the boys, the house, everything. He didn't want me there anymore. With nowhere else to go, I turned to my brother. His home was small and already crowded, but he welcomed me. Still, it wasn't a place I could stay for long. The thought of going back to my father's house crossed my mind, but his wife, my stepmother, had always made it clear I wasn't welcome. Her hatred towards me has never been hidden, and I knew she would make my life unbearable if I showed up there. So I don't know what to do anymore. I need a way out. Any advice on how to go about this would be well appreciated. Update. Hello Reddit, I am here again. My misery has only gotten worse, and I regret every second of that joke. The trust and the family we had, I had ruined it in a matter of seconds, all for a stupid, careless comment. The guilt hit me harder than anything I'd ever felt, and each time I think about it, I start crying quietly non-stop, and now I'm unable to hold it in anymore. I couldn't believe how badly I had hurt him and how thoughtless I had been. I shouldn't have said what I said, and everything I do is futile. I couldn't get Michael back into my life. He had filed for divorce, saying that if he let it slide, who knows what would happen next time I find myself in such a situation, and if the thought of me couldn't stop me, then I should have thought of my children, but I didn't care. And he's right. I was selfish, and that's not right for a mother to act in that kind of way. And the moment the papers were served, it felt like the ground slipped from beneath me. I never imagined it would come to this, but I guess I should have known better. I had pushed him too far, said things I couldn't take back, did what I never should have, and watched as everything I had built started crumbling down. The divorce wasn't just about the end of our marriage. It was the end of a life I had gotten so comfortable with, a life that included our children. The custody battle was brutal. He was determined, and I could see how much he wanted to ensure the boys were with him. I tried to fight, to prove I could be the mother they needed, but it wasn't enough. His lawyer tore apart my every move, every mistake I had made in the past, using it against me. In the end, the judge agreed with him, and he was granted full custody, and I was left with visiting rights. Now, every day feels empty. I can't hold my children in the mornings. I can't kiss them goodnight, can't help them with their homework or listen to their small victories and struggles. The only time I get to see them is when I visit. Those few hours feel like both a blessing and a torment. It's fleeting, and then I'm back to being alone, missing them with a depth I never knew was possible. I watch other mothers with their children, laughing, enjoying the little things, and it hits me all over again. I failed them, and now I have to live with the consequences. I never thought I'd be this person, the one who only gets to see her children in brief visits. It hurts in a way I can't explain, and no matter how many times I tell myself that I deserve this, the pain never quite goes away. But I have to move on. I can't keep drowning in regret and in the mistakes I've made. I've got to rebuild, for myself. I've got to face this head on and find a way to make my life meaningful again, even if it's without the family I thought I'd always have. Maybe, just maybe, if he sees how much I've changed, how hard I've worked to grow and become better, he might reconsider. But for now, I've got to focus on myself. I've got to work on building a future. Thank you to everyone who has read this far. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm starting over, and that's all I can do.
There is nothing more painful than thinking your secret is well hidden when in reality it's not. Thinking that you have everything under control when actually you're walking into a trap. I discovered this when I got served divorce papers from my husband, who I've been married to for just 2 weeks, all because I cheated. I'm as shocked as you are, honestly, but for you to understand me, you need to know my story. So I'll start from the beginning. Hey Redditors, my name is Fiona, and I am a 27-year-old woman. My husband, or should I say soon-to-be ex-husband, Eric, is a 28-year-old man. We've been married for 2 weeks and live in the United States. Eric and I first met on a regular Tuesday at college, though I later dropped out and never graduated. I spotted Eric while we were both scrambling to find the same dang textbook in the campus bookstore. We reached for it at the same time, and our hands crashed together as if it was a textbook battle. Cue the awkward laughter. We locked eyes, and there it was, that spark you hear about. He shot me a friendly grin, and we both cracked up at the ridiculousness of the situation. Our laughter was so loud that it drew puzzled looks from fellow students, but we didn't mind. Our first date was nothing fancy, just a local diner with those old-school neon signs and the smell of burgers frying in the air. Eric said he'd pick me up, and I remember the butterflies in my stomach when he knocked on my door. Once we settled into a booth, the talk just flowed, full of laughs and swapping stories. He went for a classic cheeseburger, while I opted for a veggie wrap, showing off our different tastes. With the background noise of clinking dishes and distant chatter, we found out we both loved 90s sitcoms and had some questionable music choices. Soon moving in just seemed like the next step for us. Deciding to move in together was a big deal for us. Getting our home set up turned into a bit of an adventure. From the hilarious attempts at putting together furniture to the friendly arguments about where to put stuff, every step showed us the nitty-gritty of blending 2 lives into one home. Eric's love for a clean and simple look clashed with my fondness for sentimental items and a bit of cozy chaos. Figuring out who does what around the house brought its own set of challenges. Simple things like taking out the trash or doing the dishes sometimes turned into little arguments and finding middle grounds and talking things out. Handling money together was another layer of real-life stuff. Splitting bills, doing grocery shopping together. It meant having honest chats about how we handle money, what our goals are, and figuring out compromises for our shared future. But in the midst of all the struggles, these challenges became the stories we'd laugh about later. Late-night talks about who forgot to buy milk or the shared giggles while attempting a complicated recipe made our everyday moments into shared memories. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. As the newness wore off, we faced the regular conflicts that come with sharing a space. Disagreements about how clean the house should be, the need for personal space, or even arguing about TV volume. But we persevered through everything. When Eric decided to propose, it wasn't just a moment. It was a surprise-filled, love-soaked experience that caught me totally off guard. It all started on a regular Saturday. Eric suggested we take a drive to the countryside, a spontaneous adventure that sounded like a fun idea. As we cruised through scenic roads, I could sense something was up, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Our destination turned out to be this cute bed and breakfast surrounded by hills and pretty wildflowers. The setting was already giving off vibes that something special was about to happen, but I had no clue about the magic in store. We wandered through the BB's garden, and Eric led me to a quiet gazebo decked out with fairy lights and sweet-smelling roses. It was like a scene from a romance movie, and I felt my heart racing as I wondered what was going on. With a smile, Eric started recounting our journey together, from our awkward first meeting in the college bookstore to our cozy diner dates and nature escapades. Each word felt like a hug, bringing back all those awesome memories. Then he got down on one knee, holding a small box with a shiny ring inside. Time stood still as he spilled his heart out, sharing his love, admiration, and dreams for our future. The ring sparkled in the sunlight, a symbol of his commitment. Caught between happy tears and pure joy, I heard him pop the big question, "Will you marry me?" Of course, I said yes. The grin on Eric's face was priceless, and we sealed the deal with a sweet kiss surrounded by nature. But the surprises didn't end there. Eric had set up a cozy dinner under the stars with our favorite dishes and a bottle of champagne. We savored the moment, soaking in the fact that we were starting a new chapter together. Our proposal will forever be a memory I will cherish. Eric's folks took to me like family right from the start. Their friendliness and genuine care made me feel like I belonged. Whether it was digging into meals, celebrating holidays, or just hanging out, their kindness created this vibe of love that went beyond the typical parent-kid connection. On my side, my parents saw in Eric a son-in-law who not only got our family values, but also brought his own cool stuff to the table. Eric's honesty, respect, and love for me were right in line with what we valued, making our families click on a level that wasn't just surface deep. Family get-togethers were full of amazing jokes, shared tales, and just a whole bunch of love and support. The way our families clicked was surprising, but also amazing. Having supportive families was like having a rock to lean on during tough times, be it working through the early parts of our relationship, tackling challenges, or celebrating big moments. Knowing our families had our backs gave us a solid base. I know you're probably wondering if everything was going so well. Then why and how did I cheat? Here's how it happened. Eric was away for the weekend helping out his sister who just had a baby. I stayed back home due to a pesky cold. I didn't want to risk getting the baby sick, so I decided to skip the visit and promised Eric's sister that I'd make it up to her when I was feeling better. Figuring I could at least be productive, I headed to the grocery store to grab some essentials before heading back home. I had quit my job, so I was a bit of a homebody nowadays. The local grocery store in our not-so-big town was buzzing with familiar faces. Surprise, surprise, I bumped into Alan, Eric's best friend, and the guy who'll be the best man at our wedding. No big deal in our tight-knit community. Running into someone you know is just part of the deal. Alan and I have always had a friendly thing going on because of his close ties with Eric. So when he spotted me, he gave a friendly hello. After a quick catch-up, he insisted on giving me a ride home, and I said sure. Our town's not huge, so these chance encounters are pretty common. Now, Alan's known for being a bit of a flirt. But on this day, feeling a bit cheeky, I decided to play along. The easy banter was fun and made me laugh. When he dropped me off, the joking continued, and on a whim, I threw out an invite for coffee. Alan agreed and came in for coffee. We were just talking, shooting the breeze, and things took a turn. Before I knew it, I messed up and cheated on Eric with Alan. Panic set in. What if Eric found out I betrayed him with his best friend? Alan tried to reassure me, saying we could keep it under wraps, and for a moment it helped calm my nerves. But eventually I asked Alan to leave so I could have some time to think. As I pondered it all overnight, I considered the idea that maybe if Eric didn't know, it wouldn't hurt him. However, Alan hinted he wanted more. Now call me stupid or idiotic. But in a moment of poor judgment, I made a significant error that has become one of the most regrettable mistakes of my life. Without giving it much thought, I impulsively texted Alan, expressing agreement with the idea of keeping our actions a secret. In a misguided attempt to avoid consequences, I told myself that what Eric didn't know wouldn't cause him pain. Alan was glad and he visited the next day, a Saturday, and ended up staying the night all till Sunday until he had to leave because Eric was coming. Eric came and I pretended as if all was fine and as if I hadn't just been cheating on him with his best friend. I continued pretending like that and also continued my affair with Alan. During that period, we started planning our wedding. Planning a wedding sounds like a fairy tale, but let me tell you, it's more like navigating a crazy maze of stress and unexpected challenges. Eric and I jumped into this whole adventure dreaming of a beautiful celebration, totally clueless about what was coming our way. At first, picking a venue and setting a date got us all pumped up. But reality hit hard when we dove into the nitty-gritty of wedding planning. Budget suddenly became a big deal, making us make some tough calls about the guest list, decorations, and how big we could go. Our dreams met reality and we realized that not all our dreams would be possible, testing our ability to give and take. After all, you can't eat your cake and have it. Finding the perfect vendors turned into a mission impossible. Choosing a photographer who got our vibe and a caterer that satisfied everyone felt like threading a needle. So many options left us questioning our choices and, at times, just feeling plain overwhelmed. Family expectations brought in a whole new level of drama. Balancing opinions on traditions, who gets invited, and even what to wear became a tricky dance. Every decision felt like a tightrope walk, trying to stick to traditions while making sure the day screamed us. Besides the logistics, the emotional toll hit us like a ton of bricks. As the wedding date inched closer, the pressure got real. Dealing with societal expectations and wanting everything to be perfect created tension between us. Small arguments turned into big debates, putting our relationship under strain. Unexpected stuff, like weather issues and last-minute cancellations, threw us for a loop. Navigating these surprises tested our relationship's strength, teaching us to roll with the punches and find joy in the unplanned. But hey, in the middle of the chaos, there were moments that made it all worthwhile. The laughs during DIY projects, the heart-to-heart talks about our future, and being each other's rock during tough times were reminders of the love keeping us going. I know I sound like a hypocrite considering I was cheating on Eric during that time. But to be honest, I loved him. I don't know why I made the mistake I did. During that time, I noticed that Eric was a little standoffish with me, but I didn't put much thought to it as I thought it was just the stress from planning the wedding. The stress had gotten to everybody, and we were a lot more short-tempered. Finally, the big day was here, and amid all the hustle and bustle, our wedding was a beautiful celebration of love and happiness. The morning nerves and last-minute checks gave way to a feeling of excitement as we realized this was the moment we'd been gearing up for. The venue, decked out with our chosen decorations, buzzed with the sounds of friends and family who came to share in our joy. The air was filled with all sorts of feelings: excitement, jitters, and just pure happiness. Slipping into my wedding dress and Eric putting on his suit, the reality of the day hit us. We stole a few quiet moments together, sharing glances and words that said everything without saying much. The ceremony loomed ahead, and we were ready to say our vows and kick off this new chapter together. The ceremony itself was a roller coaster of emotions. Our personal vows were very beautiful and emotional, and swapping rings sealed the deal, a promise of love and sticking together. Surrounded by our nearest and dearest, the moment was powerful. Once we said our I do's and had that first married kiss, we walked out as a couple, greeted by cheers and claps. The reception started with tasty food, good tunes, and heartfelt toasts. The dance floor became a place of laughter and joy, and we danced away, soaking up the company of those there to celebrate with us. Amid all the fun, we grabbed a few quiet moments to take in the fact that we were now officially husband and wife. The sheer joy of sharing this day with the people we loved created memories we'd cherish. Eric had seemed so happy that day you wouldn't have even known he knew I was cheating. He perfectly pretended as if all was fine. When it was time for our honeymoon, I was buzzing with excitement. I paid the cash for it beforehand because Eric had some issues with his credit card. No biggie, he promised to pay me back, and I knew he'd stick to his word. Eric isn't the type to casually borrow money, and when he does, he always squares up. Considering Eric's well-off background and solid job, I had confidence in him. This played a part in my decision to take a break from work and be a stay-at-home wife. With some leftover cash from my last job paycheck, I chipped in for our honeymoon. It might not have been a huge contribution, given Eric's financial stability, but it felt good to share in making our special trip happen. Before I paid for our honeymoon, Eric and I got into a bit of a heated discussion about how long it should be. Eric, coming from a well-off background, wanted a more extensive trip, exploring different places. For him, it wasn't a big deal financially. On the other hand, I knew that if we went on a longer honeymoon, I'd have to hit pause on my affair with Alan. Not wanting that, I argued for a more chill 1 or 2 week honeymoon, emphasizing settling down. After some back and forth, Eric finally gave in, and we agreed on a compromise. But to keep my affair under wraps, I made a pretty iffy move. After paying for the honeymoon, I quietly spilled the beans to Alan about where we were going. The plan was for him to fake a vacation with his wife, so he could bump into me and Eric without Eric catching on. Looking back, I can see I made a bunch of wrong decisions. The honeymoon destination Eric and I picked wasn't exactly budget-friendly. It was a fancy and pricey spot. Alan, being mindful of his wallet, got worried about affording it without going broke. I brushed off his concerns, blaming Eric's credit card issues for not contributing much lately. I told Alan that once Eric sorted his card problems and handed over some cash, I'd pay him back for the whole trip. Now I realize it was a messed up web of lies, going against the honesty that should be at the core of any relationship. Bringing Alan into the mix was a very messed up thing, and the money side of things just added more mess. Things went kinda as planned on our honeymoon. After a few days at our spot, guess who we bumped into? Alan and his wife. Eric was pretty surprised, but Alan smoothly spun a story about how they decided on a trip due to his wife dealing with some stress. Eric bought it without prying much, and it seemed like everything was rolling smoothly. But handling meetups with Alan turned out trickier than I thought. To make it work, whenever Eric was busy or out, or even if I just sneaked out for a bit, I'd check in with Alan to make sure his wife wasn't around, and then I'd head to his place. About a week into our honeymoon, with some days still left, I started noticing that Eric was becoming a bit distant and cold towards me. When I questioned him about it, he waved it off, claiming he was just tired. Sensing a chance to meet up with Alan, I suggested he take some rest and maybe some meds while I went out alone to give him some space. Eric agreed, and I headed out. I texted Alan to check if his wife was around, and he said she was out at the pool. So I went over to Alan's, we drank for a bit, and then became intimate. I voiced my concerns to Alan about Eric's behavior, but Alan brushed it off and told me that Eric had always been like that, right from when they were kids. Alan explained that Eric had a naturally charming personality, but there were times when he needed to recharge and take a step back from people. I got what Alan was saying because I had observed the same thing in Eric. So I decided to put my concerns about Eric's behavior out of my mind. Alan and I continued our thing for a few more hours until Alan received a text from his wife, asking if I had left. Both of us were taken aback. I saw the text myself, and it struck me as odd because his wife wasn't supposed to know I was there. Alan tried to play it cool, asking his wife what she meant, but she didn't buy it. She accused Alan of cheating on her with me, and I was utterly stunned. Not wanting to face a confrontation with Alan's wife, I quickly grabbed my bag and left. The burning question in my mind was, how did she find out? And if she knew, did Eric know too? I was pretty confident Eric was in the dark because they didn't really communicate much. However, when I returned to our hotel room, It was empty. I assumed Eric had gone out, so I texted him to ask where he was. He replied that he was at home. It seemed a bit strange, and I thought he might be joking, heading out to buy something. But as hours passed with no sign of Eric, I started to worry. Finally checking the hotel room wardrobe, I realized Eric's clothes were gone. Panic started to set in, and I messaged Eric, responding to his earlier text, asking which home. He simply replied, "Which home do you think?" Feeling totally lost and tearing up, I tried giving Eric a call, but he wouldn't answer. So I sent him a text, asking why he went back home without me and if he wasn't having a good time. I attempted the pity and confusion angle, hoping for some understanding. But Eric wasn't having it. He shot back, saying he knew about Alan and urged me to quit faking confusion. He told me to check the bedside table, where I'd find divorce papers. I turned to the bedside table, and there it was. Folks, divorce papers staring right at me. Shocked, I couldn't hold back the tears. I tried calling Eric, hoping he'd hear the crying and maybe feel a hint of sympathy, but he wouldn't pick up. Instead, he sent me a detailed text, laying it all out. He knew about me and Alan, and he wanted a divorce. Eric labeled me a cheater and a betrayer, calling me heartless. He couldn't fathom how I could carry on with his best friend while pretending everything was fine. Eric added that he had spilled the beans to Alan's wife too, and he believed she'd be dumping Alan as well. In a final blow, he expressed hope that I'd be stuck wherever I was and that Alan would face the same fate. Eric unleashed bombshell after bombshell on me. He admitted to knowing about me and Alan for a while, revealing that the credit card issue he mentioned was just a lie to make me use my savings for the honeymoon. No, he dropped the bomb that he had no intention of paying me back, and he was aware I couldn't afford a flight ticket home now. Eric declared that I was no longer welcome in his house, and he planned to mail my belongings to my parents. If, by some miracle, I managed to get money for a flight, he warned me to steer clear of his house by at least 5 feet. I was so overwhelmed I didn't know how to handle it. Eric followed through on every threat he made. I cried myself to sleep, and when I woke up in the afternoon, my parents called. Not only had Eric spilled everything to them, but he also sent my belongings back to them. I had to plead and cry before they sent me money for a plane ticket to come back home. Still hoping for a miracle, I tried calling Eric, but he wouldn't answer. The only text he sent told me to sign the divorce papers for an easier court process, and then he went silent. After getting the money from my parents, I flew home, going straight to my parents' house, knowing Eric was still furious. My parents were beyond angry because I had wrecked my marriage in barely 2 weeks, and here I was back in their house. I apologized like crazy, but they brushed it off, saying Eric deserved the apology. They dropped another bomb. Eric not only called them, but also sent screenshots of my chats with Alan. This meant Eric had some evidence of my affair. This all unfolded just a few weeks ago, and here I am at my parents' place, waiting for the divorce proceedings to be scheduled. I'm immensely grateful for my parents. Without them, I'd probably be stuck on the streets. They've been my support system, providing everything I need, including financial help. I attempted to find a job, but it's no walk in the park in this small town, as I mentioned before. Eric's family, being upper class and influential, pretty much runs the show. They have a stronghold on most businesses here. Imagine the challenge of job hunting in that scenario. Thankfully, my dad pulled some strings, and my aunt, who owns a local diner, offered me a position as a waitress. As for Alan, he managed to scrape together enough for a flight home. However, he and his wife are in the midst of a divorce. Word on the street is that she's in a better financial position, giving her the upper hand in the proceedings. Sharing my story here is my way of hoping someone learns from my mistakes. It's also a way for me to find some peace and respect amidst this mess. I'm fully aware of how wrong my actions were, and I know there's no undoing it. Eric hasn't forgiven me, and our communication is strictly divorce-related. I'm in a tough spot, but I'm optimistic that I can pull through one day. Thanks for lending an ear.